Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So let's talk about co-working for a moment, because it is incredible how fast it's growing. And you hosted the co-working conference in January, where there was all sorts of different people running co-working spaces all over Asia. And you've obviously seen in Hubud the way that it's grown, and we'll get on to the fact that you're also expanding and growing that too. What would you say, with the inside view of what's going on with people who are choosing to work in these environments, is on the one hand, with the growth, the biggest positive you see, and what's the biggest negative you see in the way it's growing?
Well, I think the biggest positive is that, and I think it's not just about co-working, it's about the way in which people are working, which is people are now choosing how they want to work. Instead of having a boss that's telling them they need to work these hours and in this type of environment, they're able to say, no, I'm able to work remotely, or no, I'm able to be my own boss, I'm able to run my own business and become a location-independent entrepreneur, or become an entrepreneur that has more freedom. So I think freedom is a big thing, and I think it's the biggest draw about collaboration. But I think along with freedom, the most exciting thing about co-working is collaboration. Is that people are able to connect. We see it at Ubud every day. It happened to me yesterday. I needed, a certain type of person to do a certain type of thing for something I was working on, and I just happened to run into that exact person, and over the next 24 hours, did a bunch of work with them. That was exactly kind of what needed to happen. So those type of, we call it, Steve Monroe, my co-founder of Ubud, used to use the term accelerated serendipity. And I think that's the kind of thing that happens at co-working spaces a lot, is that these type of collisions, and are just constantly happening. And you don't get that in a traditional office. So I think that's one of the most exciting things about it. The biggest drawbacks, I mean, there are no drawbacks.
Well, let's talk about the fact that with such a growth within the industry, with any industry which is growing, with all the different spaces that are growing as well, there's going to be challenges that you see in how things get organized, right? And there's ways to solve those challenges and so on. But what did you see? I mean, you all got together in January, I know we had some of our team there as well. What generally, for those who are in it, are they seeing as the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, there's the obvious ones like infrastructure, systems, processes, and those things take time for any business. But I think that one of the biggest challenges with a co-working space is you have, we have 300 odd members at any time, and trying to keep as many of those members as happy as possible. So we have a space challenge right now because we're bursting at the seams, and so we don't have enough quiet space for people. And so that can be a challenge because not everyone likes to work in a busy kind of dynamic space. So we have a conference room that's air conditioned and quiet, but it's only available now because we have some events at a certain time of the day. So I think as more and more co-working spaces open up, and they're just, they are mushrooming, they're taking off, I think the market is going to kind of take care of a lot of those problems because there will be spaces that cater for different types of people, different types of collaborations, and different types of jobs. But we have a heavy number right now of digital nomads and location-independent entrepreneurs. But I think as time evolves with co-working and there's more and more spaces, that problem will kind of be taken care of. But it's certainly a challenge. That's one of the challenges we're facing right now.
So there's always a stage within anything that starts up where it starts very artisan and cool, and everyone's kind of got their. You can go back 50 years to like the small restaurants, cafes, and then suddenly fast food comes along, and suddenly you look at big corporates that come on board. Like there's been all this news in America in the last 6 months. WeWork, right? And so, for anyone who doesn't know WeWork basically set up in New York. It's grown as a co-working space, but it hit the news in November, at a valuation of $1.5 million. They just got 15,000 members, but the way they designed the 15,000 members is that they generally pay $1,000 each or something, and they value that up at, what was now 1.5 million, 1.5 billion, and they have all of these developers come in thinking, hey, this is a good way to make money now. And then by December, they raised around $325 million out of $5 billion. I mean, it's just crazy numbers. And now there's some other big guys coming in, and all the developers are coming in too. Is that a threat? Do you think we'll preserve in Asia the whole feel that this is something created by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs? Or is there
I mean, you're the future, so I would really encourage you. I don't know. I mean, we were. They're amazing. I mean, they're at the Starbucks co-working right now, and they're taking off. And I don't think anyone knows how it's going to go.
Well, to the point about one thing that they do, which they make a real clear point, which I think quite a few of the larger organizations do, which is the power of community, and the way they kind of equip each entrepreneur with a really easy way to connect to everyone else, and then to get all sorts of specials off Uber or off their online systems and so on. Is that a direction you see Hubud going into in terms of how you are equipping all of those who are members to be able to connect even more effectively outside the office?
I mean, definitely. We have a Hubud Facebook members group now, just on a small example. And the quality of people in that group, you have to be a member to be on the Facebook group, and the type of interactions and the type of collaborations that are coming into that group is really exciting. Compared to a lot of the other Facebook groups that you have in Bali, which can be, what's the word? Not as collaborative. More public.
Alongside all of the growth of co-working as spaces where we can collaborate, there's a whole education side as well.
So on the educational side, you've got incubators, accelerators. You started up Turnpoint recently, which is largely around that whole way of okay, let's create that education as well. And we're talking just outside about the different types of entrepreneurs, whether they're lifestyle entrepreneur who comes because they really want to enjoy Bali and they don't want to scale up a big company. The companies that actually are looking to scale, but are looking to do it in a very different way. Or even just the traveling nomad, the digital nomad that actually wants to travel around the world, and again is doing it really from the point of view of freedom, more than trying to go out and make a lot of money. What would you say when you started Turnpoint was the main focus, and how is that now evolving now that you've got it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, Turnpoint is more about the lifestyle entrepreneur, because that's been our membership at Hubud. So what we've seen, as you know, good entrepreneurship is trying to solve the problem that you found, that you've seen, and you've identified. And the problem we've seen with a lot of our members is that they've quit their job, or they're thinking about quitting their job, and they're in some type of transition, and they don't have the skills to move into the next period of their life. And usually it's an entrepreneurial type of project that they're looking to get off the ground. So the idea with Turnpoint is to give people those skills, and probably more important, to give people the confidence that they can go out and do it. Just on the way here, I was listening to the Tropical MBA podcast. I don't know if you know those guys, Dan and Andrew. I mean, they're just very smart, and they get a lot of questions from their membership and their listeners about, how much money do I need to have to take the jump? What do I need to do to work in a different kind of way as a digital nomad or a location entrepreneur? And more often than not, it's really the confidence that people need, that they can do it on their own. It's really not about the money. It's about feeling like they're able to do it. So it's about the mindset.
And now that you started it, is it going as planned? Is it going faster? Is it going slower? How do you find that?
Well, we said at the start that the challenge for Turnpoint is two things. It's logistics and obviously it's marketing. The logistics is Bali, so everything's possible, and we have a lot of deep networks here, so that's coming along. The marketing is more of a challenge for us because our network is people who are already here, and so reaching out to that other set of people who aren't here, the aspirational entrepreneurs, is something that we're still trying to figure out how to do. We're only 4 months into it, so we've been running courses at we're on pace for what we were hoping for this year. But that's definitely, the marketing is definitely one of our big challenges.
So as an example, for anyone who's not familiar with Turnpoint, what would be a couple of the different programs you're running around?
Rick Shreves, who's the teacher, he's written a number of kind of marketing for dummies, online marketing for dummies books. He'll basically walk you through all of the tools you need to be a really serious digital marketer. And that's a hard skill course. We did a Ruby on Rails course with a partner, which just finished up at the end of February. The soft skills course that is our kind of flagship course is called 9 to Thrive, and it's taught by Lydia Lee. I don't know if you know Lydia. She's from, she has her own brand called screwthecubicle.com. She's a former corporate dropout who's now kind of coaching and moving into the teaching area or teaching kind of world. And that's a 6-day residential course where people come and basically figure out what kind of entrepreneurial journey they want to take. And we've had 2 of those courses so far, and it's a little bit scary because we've had some people who've come and then they've gone back and quit their job. So it's definitely having an impact, and I really believe in and you're doing it here, immersive learning, where you're away from your family and friends. The hero's journey, from Joseph Campbell, the mythological, leaving what you know, immersing yourself in a new place and a new set of rules and learnings, and then returning with the knowledge that you've gained. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do with TurnPoint. We look at Hubud as destination working, and we think we've been successful setting that up. And so TurnPoint is destination learning.
Do we find, we run our iLAB programs here over 30 days, and we also have these 15-day ones, and they always fill up from people around the world, and about a third of everyone on those programs, we have about 15 on each time, a third of those on each one of them ends up moving to Bali.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a huge amount, because when you actually, because I think a lot of people, when they're in their city, whether it's London, New York, think, going to a place like Bali or somewhere and moving, it's like a huge, it's a huge challenge, and it used to be a huge challenge, whereas now there's communities, it's easier, the cost of living is low, you suddenly realize, geez, I can actually make this happen. Yeah. And I think it's that kind of opening up the possibility, which really is allowing us to shift. So on that point, so we're going to give everyone a chance to ask questions.
Let me say one thing on that, because I think it's a really good point. To me, the most exciting thing about entrepreneurs coming to Bali and really coming to anywhere that's not their home is, I think, it's not only the cost of living, which is lower, but it's the cost of failure. So when you're living in your hometown, if I was in Toronto and where I was for 10 years and I opened a co-working space, financially it would be a serious investment to do. But I think more importantly, if it didn't go well, I would be in my community. For me, failing in front of my friends and people I've known for a long time and my former colleagues, that's a harder thing to get over, as going to a place like Bali, especially if you're doing an online business or something that's not as public. I mean, Hubud's fairly public, so if it failed, it would probably be embarrassing. But I think the cost of failure here is a lot lower. And psychologically, people are able to try new things. People are able to move into new spaces without having to worry about the judgment of. And mostly, it's actually, most of the time, they're actually not being judged, but it's the sense that they're going to be judged, that they don't want to try it because, what if it doesn't go well, and my friends and family think that I'm a failure. And normally, their friends and family aren't thinking about that. But the entrepreneurs I've spoken to who have come here and who have started new ventures here, that's one of the things that they talk about. There's kind of a lightness and a sense that anything's possible here that they don't often have back home.
I had a conversation with a couple in London straight after the London riots, which was about 5 years ago. And they were saying, this is the end point of progress, is you're in a situation where, the jobs get taken, the youth get disenfranchised, and everyone's going to riot. That's what's going to happen. If people can't find jobs, if people can't find ways to look after themselves, they're just going to riot, and that's what's going to happen. And I shared with them the experience after, being at Green School, being here in Bali, to say, well, we see the opposite, which is when people come to Bali and they find that, maybe after, 2 days a week, but by making a bit of money, they can survive. It's okay. They can survive, and they don't have to go out and get the Mercedes car because no one else is driving the Mercedes car. And they don't have to go out and compete with the physical things so no one else is. When they realize the cost of living can be lower, what they don't do is riot because because they're not getting more money. What they do is they focus at their art, right? It's like a number of people who go to the school and say, well, what do I want? If I've got extra time, what am I going to do that actually is going to fulfill me and be fulfilling for others? It might be, learning a new musical instrument. It might be, creating a business which you actually want to have some success in. But there's an element around artisanship or how that links in with entrepreneurship, which I think is really interesting. And with that whole concept of how do we use what we're learning as we go through this process, and most of the people in this room are people who are in that process, how do we then impact back whatever country we're in? So for example, we talk about social entrepreneurship. Indonesia, I was in Jakarta, I was mentioning to you 3 weeks ago with 3 of the top venture capital companies that are trying to get entrepreneurship going with Indonesian entrepreneurs. And there was a Jakarta Post article that came out like 2 weeks ago that was saying that whereas America has about 12% of its population are entrepreneurs, even Singapore has like 7%, Indonesia has 1.7% of Indonesians are entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think around the fact that there are not many Indonesians here who actually are locally Indonesian and being entrepreneurial? What do you think in terms of the power of something like Hubud, co-working, and the fact that we're attracting people from around the world to Bali and into Indonesia? How can that or can it impact entrepreneurship with people in Indonesia as well?
Sure. Well, we've said from the start that we didn't ever want Hubud to be a bubble. We didn't ever want it to be, exclusive to certain people or certain communities. And so we've looked from the time we've started to have Balinese and Indonesians involved in the space. But it's been one of our challenges. We recently partnered with the Australian consulate and got some funding from them to open a co-working space for Balinese here in Gianyar, in the city of Gianyar. And we ran it for 3 months from November to the end of February. And the idea was to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage sort of job futures in the new economy in Indonesia. And it was interesting because the events that we held in the space were very well attended, and a lot of young Balinese in particular are interested in learning about WordPress and technical skills, and we had some film nights, and people are definitely interested in that. But the co-working space, which had the fastest internet of any place I've ever been, because we got telecom to come in and they souped it up, was really quiet. It was not well used. So I think I think that entrepreneurship amongst Balinese is, especially in the new economy, is really in its infancy. And there's certainly some business schools in Denpasar, and there's some entrepreneurs in Denpasar that are doing things and are trying to get some traction. We've been to some events down there. We're connected into some of those communities. There's an entrepreneurship group in Ubud that's run by Balinese, and they've come and used our space. But in terms of day-to-day use of Hubud and people launching e-commerce businesses, and it hasn't happened. Interestingly, the Indonesians who have felt most at home at Hubud and who have kind of fit into the culture there are generally from Jakarta, Bandung, Yogyakarta, and are coming out of some of the bigger corporations, universities. We have some very good friends in Bandung who have come to Hubud. I've gone to visit them in Bandung. For those of you who haven't been to Bandung, it's I don't know, have you been to Bandung? It's a really cool town. It's about 2 hours from Jakarta. There's a heavy number of Indonesian universities there, so it's a lot of the young tech guys are coming out of Bandung. And so I'm really interested in the type of collaborations that can happen between Bandung, Jakarta, Ubud, Bali. And I think we're getting there. We're trying to build those bridges, but it's going to take time. I was in Jakarta last week at a launch of, there's an incubation program that a friend of ours runs in partnership with Indosat. And they had 12 startups that were Indonesian startups that were presenting to investors after 4 months of their incubation period. Great ideas. They'd gotten great mentoring. And those are the type of investments that I think foreign investors and Indonesian investors are looking to make in Indonesia. Everyone's talking about the booming economy in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia. There's obviously a huge amount of mobile penetration here. The market is there. There's no doubt. The market is there. The middle class are growing. It's a smart place to come and invest. The regulatory environment is a little bit tricky, to put it in a nice way. But I'm super hopeful, but I'm an eternal optimist. So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
No, I think it does. I mean, as you say, it's at an infancy, and it really is going to be interesting how it evolves. I mean, you go to India, and India has many, many co-working spaces, but they're co-working spaces full of Indian nationals.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting, the dynamic and the shifts that are possible.
I mean, Jakarta, the co-working spaces are booming in Jakarta right now.
That's true. That is true.
So there's quite a few, and Bandung, our friends are opening one there. Yeah. So it's coming, but it's definitely nowhere near a lot of other other places.
Absolutely. So I've been asking a bunch of questions. We're going to take some questions from our audience. It could be questions about anything we've been talking about or anything else you'd like to ask Peter about, given that he himself has been in this whole process of continuing to grow. And we'll be coming back to more about the future of Hubud at the end as well. But who would like to ask a question? Yes, we have a microphone coming over. So when you're asking a question, just share who you are and then head right into the question.
Hi, thank you guys so much. My name is Lee. I really like the kind of soundbite that you had of that the cost of living is lower, but also the cost of failure is lower here too. That really helped me put perspective on things that I've experienced here. So I've never heard somebody articulate it that way, so thank you for that. I'm interested in kind of the opposite of failure and the word success and what that word means to you, how, in what way you measure success, and if that has changed since you've come here.
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the gifts of Bali is that we tend to look at life in a more holistic way, starting with the experience of being around Balinese every day. I mean, Balinese are the Balinese community, and I don't want to make generalizations, but in general, their priorities are family and community, and then business. So I think that being here, you're just going to absorb some of that in a what's the word? It becomes part of who you are just by living here. I also think that, going back to what Roger was saying about, there's not a lot of ostentatious shows of wealth here. It's just not. I don't know anyone who drives a Porsche. I was talking to someone from Miami the other day, and they were like, "If you don't have a Porsche, is like a scooter in Bali." It's like he's like, everyone I know has a Porsche. It's like nothing, right? Whereas here, there's no. People have nice houses. A lot of people who live here for a long time have nice houses, but it's not. Success is not measured by what you have here. So I think that's something that, that living here kind of becomes part of who you are. In terms of what I've seen at Hubud, I think people measure success by the amount of freedom that they have. I think Hubudians in general, and we have a huge percentage of our members that are digital nomads, in general, they really value the fact that they're mobile and that they're collaborative and that they're entrepreneurial. And I would say that those things are things that they value ahead of how much money they have in the bank. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Totally. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the question. Who else would like to ask a question? Other questions? Yes.
Hello, my name is Caroline. How is it going with the Nada Hubud, which you want to open, the Nada space?
This is top secret.
That's okay, that's the answer.
So many of you might know, we announced at our town hall recently that Hubud is moving to a new location, about a kilometer from where we are, in Penistan and Chapuan area. It's going well. We've started making some designs for the space. The financing's coming together. It's going to be great. We're hoping to move in January of 2016, so in about 8 months. As I was saying to Roger, one of the big challenges we have at Hubud right now is just it's too busy, or it's too crowded. Never too busy. So we need to have more space for our members, and we need to have certain more kind of co-working specific facilities built. And so that's what we're going to make sure we have in the new space.
Awesome.
You mentioned the Hubud culture and how that has been, in some cases, diluted with some of the other spaces that you've been using and expanding to. So, could you give me an idea of what you feel are the essence of the Hubud culture and why it is being? People don't get the quote same vibe in other spaces.
That's the secret sauce, man. That's the secret sauce.
That's why I'm asking.
I think it goes back to the very first question which Roger asked me, which was, you guys built the community first. And I think, to kind of define it, I think collaboration's part of it. I think what I like about Hubud is when you walk into the space, you feel like things are happening. It's not a library. I think we've been fortunate that we're on a road where there's white noise. We have a lot of fans on, so people aren't afraid to interact with each other and talk with each other. I was in a space, I won't say where, recently, and it was very quiet, and everyone was sitting on their laptop with their headphones, and if their phone rang, it would be really disruptive. Whereas at Hubud, I mean, there's still disruptive people who yell on their phones sometimes, but in general, you're able to have a conversation without just totally destroying the vibe in the space. And then I think the big secret sauce for us has been, and it happened about 6 months after we opened, was our emphasis on free events. I used to do a ton of hustling in our first year of trying to get people to talk and come to the events, and now our events team does it all, and it's fantastic, and they do a great job. And our newsletter comes out every week with the list of events, and every week I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. I mean, this is a great event. We have a woman who's talking on Monday about how to talk to investors on for-profit organizations. And she's just spent 3 years running. She was at Unlimited India. And so she came to us through our network, and she's given. So just the quality of people that are coming through the space and sharing, I think, is amazing. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Actually, that whole point about running so many events, where the events are as much about the people who are actually the ones speaking, right? It's like giving people a chance in what can be a very anonymous and lonely kind of role of running your own business, or to actually be acknowledged, to find new customers who actually can get to see what you're actually got as a level of expertise. Here at iLAB, one of the first things we do, as well as saying what do you want to learn, is if you're going to give a talk, what are you going to give a talk on? And many people haven't really thought about that. And when you think about it, it's like, well, I do have something to talk about.
Yeah.
And so there's so much about what I see, what you do with Hubud is actually allowing the talent to bubble up, so then everyone else can see it and they want to be a part of that too.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we have some members here who have given many talks, and you could ask Merab. I think one of the things that has been great, I mean, she, in her previous place where she was working, and she should probably talk for herself, but she didn't have, I don't think Merab had a huge opportunity to stand up and public speak and do that. And for us, again, like the cost of failure at Hubud, it's a free talk. If no one shows up, it doesn't matter. So sometimes we have 6 people, and often we have 40 people that come to the events.
Rav, you were just sharing earlier just about the cycles of getting into those environments and so on. What would you say with the environment, whether it's about Hubud or just co-working in general, is what you've really felt a benefit from as you've been growing your business, and where do you see limitations or where evolution happens around it as well?
Merab likes to be prepared. Just
yes,
for the record.
okay. I'll do my best. I'm a lord, I'm a lord. I can't be like on the spot. But first of all, yes, the ability to just talk in front of people. That I worked from home for 12 years, and I never had the opportunity. So it was really fun for me to be able to actually, I can talk about ELANs, I can talk about usability testing. I gave like 4 different presentations last year.
You did 4 last year. You did 4 last year after not speaking for 12 years.
Yes. Yeah.
And good
I can talk about that. And they came to me and like, can you talk about outsourcing? Can you talk about this? I was like, yeah, I can talk.
Now, you wouldn't really call yourself in the same category as the digital nomad from the point of view that you're self-employed doing your own thing, because you've got a pretty sizable business you're growing as well, right?
I have about 20 people.
So you've got 20 people, it's growing, you're scaling it.
Yeah.
How does it fit in terms of that type of a business, scaling alongside those who are quite happy to be 1, 2-man, 3-man band growing as well? Is there a good cross-fertilization you see within that as well? You
mean co-working with other people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I hired like 4 or 5 different people from Hubud. Like you said, like, you meet people like, I was in one of the meetings once, one of the first meetings I attended was like technology meeting. I was like, okay, I'll show up. And I was like, there was like 5 people there. Does anybody know anything about automation, WebDriver? I do. Turns out I had one of the biggest experts from Australia. Just happened to be there. The synchronicity thing really worked, and I hired him. It was really, really great, You never know who you're going to meet. And I think what Peter didn't mention about the success of Hubud, why you have a special vibe, is because Peter and Steve get out of their way to introduce people to each other, which is other co-working spaces don't give a damn at all, you know, from my experience.
Yeah.
I've been to 4 other co-working spaces. They don't introduce it to each other. So for me, that made a big difference.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Can I ask
Thanks.
Rob a question? I just want to follow up on Roger. Do you consider yourself a digital nomad?
Yes, but I sometimes get stuck in one place for a long time, so I don't know if it's a nomad or not. Like I'm stuck in Ubud right now because I like it.
I think digital nomad's more of a state of mind
Yeah.
than, you know, a certain amount of, it doesn't matter how often you move. I mean, I kind of consider myself a digital nomad at heart because I can work from anywhere with my laptop. You know, when I go back to Canada, I'm working. When I travel, I'm working. If I have my laptop,
It's not about where you are or how much do you really travel. It's about the fact that you can actually do that if you want to.
Yeah.
And have the freedom to just pick up your laptop and just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Very good. Awesome. Let's take a couple more questions. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm Axel, and I really like that you focused on freedom as what Ubud is about. Also think education is about liberation, and that's kind of the point of it. Where I come from in the States, education is wildly expensive and really not about the learner. It's more about culling and getting you into a system, which I understood back in the Industrial Revolution. But now people really want to be who they are. So that's why I didn't go to grad school. I decided to do a sabbatical, and I'm on a sabbatical for the next 18 months. But I guess my question is really about pipelines. You know, your problem around connecting to external people outside of Ubud. I'm one of those people who are in this self-directed learning movement in the United States. I helped put a program together called the Open Masters. And there's another program called Experience Institute. There's Nomads. There's so many self-directed learning programs. So what would you say we can do to kind of really create a pipeline from folks waking up to how they want to learn and kind of landing in a place like Ubud where freedom is possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I wish I knew the answer. I think, you know, one of the exciting things about co-working spaces is that as they grow, I think the network of them is connecting more and more. They're connecting with each other more and more. So that what we see at Hubud is people who are working at a co-working space in New York City or working at a co-working space in Berlin, and they show up to Hubud, they're like, oh, I get it. Okay, this is like, I feel comfortable here. So I think if we are able to take those type of learning programs and those type of learning, you know, opportunities and move them into the network of co-working spaces, and maybe there's some big players that come up that are really, you know, powerful and able to connect the different co-working spaces, then I think that could be an interesting way of sharing them. We've also talked a lot at Hubud about, since we opened, about, you know, online education and combining online education with offline education. Because, you know, as Roger's doing here and as we're doing now with TurnPoint, there is something powerful about learning with people face-to-face, you know, together. And so if we're able to kind of, but there's also obviously something incredible about all of the opportunity that's available online now to be educated and to educate yourself but it's really hard to do, you know, like the MOOCs and, you know, like the actual number of people that graduate from a lot of the massive online, what does MOOC stand for again? Massive online, open course?
Open course, yeah. Massive
open online. It's not that big. So we've talked about, you know, having MOOCs at Hubud and having people sign up and do them together. We're starting an Amazon course that's similar to that right now, where people are learning together. So I think that's something, you know, if co-working spaces can become part of the education offer, I think that would be really interesting.
I'll just quickly, you made me think about the relationships, right? Really letting people know that it is possible. So like stories of someone did a sabbatical and then they started a co-working space. I think those are so important to get out there. So, you know.
Yeah, I think the power of storytelling is I can tell you my favorite digital nomad story. And it happened, we opened in March, it happened in April. We had a guy called Jacob Hiller show up at Hubud. We had like 40 members at the time, and we were in our infancy. And Jacob had played college basketball in the U.S., and he was not good enough to go on and play professional either in the U.S. or in any of the international leagues. And so he wrote about what he knew, and what he knew was how to jump. So he wrote a book about how to jump higher called The Jump Manual. And he started selling it online for $20. And people started buying it. And so he found out about affiliate marketers and how he could get other people to sell his stuff, his book for him. And so he started offering it to these affiliate marketers for $69, and they get 75% of the profit. He gets 20%. So he's basically making the same thing, but he didn't have to sell it. 5 years later, when he came to Hubud, he was making $30,000 a month profit, selling his jump manual.
A lot of people want to know how to jump.
A lot of people know how to. His clientele was like teenage boys, suburban teenage boys in the United States. And then he wrote one about volleyball as well. So became still in my head as the prototypical digital nomad, and the prototypical sort of, as you said, one or two man band. He probably has a team of about 7 or 8 now that are working for him, VAs in the Philippines. I think he has someone in the U.S. who manages part of what he's doing. And he's also now done a spin-off business about how to do what he's done. Yeah, so that's the story that when I tell people, they get it. They're like, oh, wow, okay, awesome. That is a digital nomad.
That's great. Another question? This will be, I think, our final question.
Well, on the topic of education, with people teaching themselves so many things alone in their home and when they have time, what is the difference with the people that want to come to Turnpoint to learn together versus teaching themselves on their own?
Well, I think it's the difference between doing yoga at home or going to a yoga class. I love the idea of doing yoga every day at home, but I just don't do it, It's hard to be disciplined on your own. Whereas I think, and it's part of why co-working spaces work, because when you walk into a co-working space and people are working, it's contagious. You want to sit down and work. I think when you're in a learning environment and people are learning, it's contagious. You want to share, you're motivated to learn. So I think that's, to me, I think there's something about that kind of shared experience that is very human. And I think that's the difference between learning on your own and learning in an environment like here or, with Turnpoint.
Thanks, everyone, very much for the questions. And I'm going to finish, Peter, with just 2 questions. The first one's about education. We met at Green School, first of all. We're both passionate about education. A lot of people talk about how if kids through school could actually get that there's a world of opportunity out there. And for many of them, they leave school with no idea about the kind of lifestyle that people at Hubud have and people here in this room have. Do you see a bridge there? Do you see there being something where the likes of Hubud and other co-working spaces can accelerate that progress of actually allowing or sharing for school leavers to actually realize that there's a way for them to be able to actually almost step right into this kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm going to tell another story. One of the things we talk about with Turnpoint is this idea of just-in-time learning. So, when the model for the last 40, 50 years with university has been you go to university for 4 years, and then you get a job for 40 years, and then you retire. And that's basically like the educational system. You get set for your career, and then you do the career, and then you're done. That's not happening anymore, right? That's done. So we talk about, with Turnpoint, okay, I'm going to do this job for 2 or 3 years, or whatever amount of time. Then when I need to learn something, I go and learn it in an educational environment that's immersive, intense, not necessarily very long, anywhere from a week to a month or 2. I mean, you have your people here for a month. That's a great way to learn, I think. When I was learning to be a video journalist in Canada, I got hired by this very innovative guy, and he sent me to the United States for a week to do a shooting course. And what I learned at that shooting course, I have used for the next 10 years of my career. And that was way more valuable to me than the 2-year master's program I did in journalism. So I think, to me, that's the future of education. Just in time, learning as you go, intense, and then right into practice right away. We had, and I've told you the story, but I'm going to tell the audience. We had a group of Stanford MBA students come. And, you know, I looked online after they came, $59,000 a year for a Stanford MBA. And it's a 2-year program. We had 30 Stanford MBA students come to Hubud about a month ago, and they came and I gave them a little spiel about Hubud and the future of work and how I see, you know, things changing in the workplace. And behind Hubud at the time we have a villa, and there was 30 digital nomads from a group called Hacker Paradise that had rented the villa, and they were working together. And I took these Stanford MBA students and introduced them to the digital nomad group, and they had this kind of awkward interaction, and a couple of the digital nomads stood up and said what they were doing, and this Stanford MBA girl puts up her hand and she says to one of the guys, so what does your boss think of this? You know, you're in Bali and you're here and you're working, but does he really believe that you're working? And he's like Eastern European guy, and he's like, no, you don't understand. I am the boss. And I think that's the difference between like these two worlds, right? The Stanford MBA is the old model, and these kids, I mean, most of them are in their 20s, early 30s maybe, max. That's the future, you know, and they're learning it as they go. They're out in the world. They're doing it. They're connecting with each other, learning from each other. I think that's really exciting.
And that kind of leads right into my very last question, which is, let's imagine there's a whole bunch of people, which there are, listening to this conversation, and they're going, yeah, well, you know, Peter's done this, and he's kind of like, you know, left it all behind and gone out, and now he's living this life, doing this. I couldn't do that, right?
Right.
Because there's a huge amount of fear that people have about what they, you know, it's like the risk of doing something like that. So my final question is, what would be your advice to anyone who might be listening who's in that place, which is, I love the idea of that whole lifestyle and doing all of that, but I couldn't do that. I want to, but I couldn't. What would you say to that person?
Well, you know, I grew up, my parents were school teachers. And so we traveled a little bit in Canada and the US, but I didn't do a ton of international travel. I mean, my kids now are total expats, right? They've been to 25 countries, and they're like, you know, jump on and off planes like it's nothing. But that was not my experience growing up. And when I was in grade 9, I had a teacher who took a year off and traveled around the world. And I was interested in travel at the time, and when he came back, I was like, it was amazing. And I sat down with him, and I was like, you know, I want to start traveling. What's your advice? What's one place I should go? And he said, and I'll never forget, he said, it doesn't matter, just go. And so I think that, you know, would be my advice, is just do it. I think it's only your own mental limitations that are holding you back. Just do it.
Peter Worrell. Let's give Peter Worrell a big round of applause.